like to thank you for coming out to join us tonight and taking this little trip back in time with us for our play. But before we begin, we did have a few announcements. Should an emergency occur, there are exits to be found at the back side of both exits of the theater. We would like to ask you to turn off all cell phones and electronic devices. And if you have any noisy foods or candies, to unwrap them now before our show begins. And also, there will be no flash photography during the course of our show. Thank you, and please enjoy. Well, this feels good. Come on up to the fire, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, before you mess anything up, Mr. Henderson, just what was the Mr. Hale's song when he came here yesterday?
Oh, by the way, things just as you left them yesterday. Has anything been moved?
It's just the same. When dropping was 0 last night, I thought I'd better send Frank out to make a fire for us. No use getting the motor with a big case on. But I told him not to touch anything except the stove, and you know Frank.
I still think someone should have been left here yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. When I had to send Frank out to Moore Center for that man who went crazy, I'll have you know I had my hands full yesterday. And as long as I don't know everything here myself.
Well, when I talked to Hale about what happened yesterday, he said he'd come out with Harry to talk to Wright about putting in a card at telephone. He said Wright had put him off about it right off before, but he thought if he talked about it before Mrs. Wright...
I'm not sure that's what Mrs. Wright thought made any difference to John.
I do want to talk more about that, but later. When I asked Hale what happened when he came out, he said he knocked, but he didn't see or hear anything, so he knocked again. And he thought he heard someone say, "Come in." He came into the house through that door, and sitting there, in that chair, was Mrs. Wright.
What was she doing?
He said she was just rocking back and forth. He said she had her apron in her hands, and she was kind of tweaking it. All he said was she looked queer.
How do you mean queer?
He said she looked as if she didn't know what she was going to do next. She looked kind of done up, but she didn't seem to mind his coming. She didn't pay much attention to him at all. When Hale asked her about seeing John, she laughed. That's what he called it, a laugh. Well, Hale asked her, "Well, can't I see John?" "No," she said. "Well, why? Isn't he home?" "Yes," she said. "Then why can't I see him?" "Because he's dead," she said. Not getting a bit excited, just rocking back and forth. Well, Hale said he didn't know what to do next, so he just asked her, "Well, where is he?" And she just pointed upstairs, like that. "Well, what did he die of?" "He died of a rope around his neck," she said. Well, that's when Hale thought he might need some help, so he went outside to get Harry. And then when Harry came in, they both went upstairs, and there was John just lying.
Let's go over that later. We can point it out. Just continue on with the story.
Well, when they came back down, she was still sitting there, just as she was. Hale asked her if anybody had been notified, and she said no. Harry said, "Well, who done it?" "I don't know," she said. Harry told her, "Well, weren't you sleeping in the bed with him?" She said, "Yes, but I sleep on the inside."
Somebody slipped her up around his neck and strangled him. So she didn't wake up?
She didn't wake up. "I sleep sound," she said. Well, that's when Harry thought they ought to let her tell her story to the coroner or to you, Sheriff. So Harry went down the road to Rivers' place where there's a telephone. And while he was gone, Hale said she moved from that chair over there to this one right here. And she just sat there with her head down and her hands in her lap. Well, soon Harry got back, and then Dr. Lloyd, and then you, Sheriff, and that's all I got out of him.
I suppose when you were upstairs first, there was the barn around there.
You sure there's nothing important here? Nothing that would point to any kind of motive?
Nothing here but kitchen things.
Huh. Well, this is a fine mess.
Whoa, her fruit. It did freeze. She worried about that when it turned so cold. She said the fire'd go out and her jars would break.
Well, can you beat the women? Hunt for murder and where are her preserves?
Well, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about before we're through.
Well, women all used to worrying over trifles.
To be sure. And yet, for all their worries, what would we do without the ladies? Dirty towels. Not much of a housekeeper, would you say, ladies?
There's a great deal of work to be done on a farm.
To be sure. And yet I know some Dixon County farmhouses that don't have such roller towels.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
Loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose that you were friends, too.
I've not seen much of her of late. It's been more than a year.
Why's that? Didn't you like her?
Oh, I liked her well enough, I suppose. It's just, well,
Yes.
it never seemed a very cheerful place.
It is not cheerful. I shouldn't say that she had the homemaking instinct.
Well, I don't know as John Wright had either.
Ah, you mean they didn't get along?
No, I don't mean anything by it. It's just, well, I don't think the place would be more cheerful for John Wright's being in it.
Well, I do want to talk more about that later, but I want to get the lay of things upstairs now.
Mrs. Peters was to take in a few small things, clothes and such. We left in such a hurry yesterday.
Well, all right, but I do want to see what you take, Mrs. Peters. And keep an eye out for anything that might be of use to us.
Yes, Mr. Henderson. I'd hate to have men come in my kitchen, snooping around, criticizing.
Of course, it's no more than their duty.
Duty's all right, I suppose. But you know that deputy sheriff that come out here to start the fire? He might have got a little of this on him. We should have thought of that sooner. It seems kind of mean to talk about her for not having things right up the way she might, and she had to come away in such a hurry.
She had bread set.
She was going to put this there. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. No, I think there's some here that's all right. Yes, here. Why, I declare I believe it's the only one. She'll feel awful bad after all her hard work in the hot weather. I was really actually when I put up my cherries last summer.
Well, I must get those things from the front room closet. You coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You can help me carry them. My, it's cold in there.
Right, it's close. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the ladies' aid. Well, I suppose she felt she couldn't do her part. And then you just don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. She used to wear such pretty clothes and be lively when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. Oh, but that was 30 years ago. this all you was to take in?
She said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get you dirty in jail, goodness knows. But I suppose to make her feel more natural. She said it was in the drawer in this cupboard. Yes, here. And her little shawl by the door. Yes, here it is.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and her little shawl, worrying about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson's awful sarcastic in his speech, and he'll make fun of her, saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake up when they was slipping that rope under his neck.
No, strange. It must have been done awful crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man. Rigging it all up like that?
That's just what Mr. Hale said. There's a gun in the house. That's what he said he can't believe.
Mr. Henderson said coming out that what was needed for the case was a motive. Something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here.
It's hard to hear.
I wonder how they're finding things upstairs. Hope she had it a little more slicked up, you know? It seems kind of like sneaky. Locking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to get her own house to turn against her.
The law is the law, Mrs. Hale.
I suppose it is. You better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
Why, it's her log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it.
They wonder if she was going to piece it, or quilt it, or just knot it.
Oh, Frank's fire didn't do much good upstairs, did it? Well, I suppose we better get out to the barn and get that cleared away.
Well, I don't see as there's anything so strange. Our taking up our time with the little things, or waiting for them to gather the evidence. I don't see as there's anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Mrs. Peters, look at this one. This is the one she was working on. And look at the stitching. All the rest of it's been so nice and even. This one's all over the place. Why, it's as if she didn't even know what she was about.
Oh, what are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
I'm just pulling out a few stitches that aren't so very good. Bad sewing has always made me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
what do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know if she was nervous. I sometimes so awful queer when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They may be done sooner than we think. Now, where do you suppose I could find some paper? And a bit of string?
That cupboard, maybe.
Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why, I don't know if she did or not. I've not been here in so long. Come to think of it, there was a man around here last year selling berries cheap. But I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Seems funny to think of a bird here. But she must have had one. Or why else would she have the cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose the cat got it.
Oh no, she didn't have a cat. She's got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room and she was real upset. Asked me to take it out.
My sister Bessie was always like that. Queer, ain't it?
Why, Mrs. Hale, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Looks as if someone must have been rough with it.
Why, yes.
Well, I wish they were going to find any evidence they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be lonesome. Sitting here all alone.
It would, wouldn't it? Oh, I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I'd come over here to see her once in a while. I wish I had.
But you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house and your children.
I could have come. I stayed away because of work here. That's why I ought to have come. I've never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow. You can't see the road. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place. It always was. I wish I'd come to see Minnie Foster once in a while. I can see now.
But you mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Sometimes we just don't see how it is with other folks until something comes up.
Not having children makes for less work, but it makes for a quiet house. John ride out to work all day. No company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
No, not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man.
Yes, good. He didn't drink. He paid his debts. Kept his word as well as most, I suppose. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to pass the time of day with him, it's like a raw wind that gets right to the bone. I should think she would have wanted to burn. But what do you suppose went with it?
I don't know. Unless it got sick and died.
You weren't raised around her, were you? You didn't know her.
No, not until they brought her in yesterday.
She, come to think of it, she was kind of like a bird herself. Real pretty and sweet, but kind of timid and fluttery. How she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take in the quilt with you? It might take up her mind.
I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, how could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if all her patches and her things are in here.
Here's some red. I expect this has got her sewing things in it. My, what a pretty box. This looks as if something somebody would give you. Maybe her scissors are in here. Oh, there's something wrapped up in this.
It's not her scissors.
Oh, Mrs. Peters, it's
the bird!
But look at it. Look at its neck.
the other side too. Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was gonna quilt it or knot it?
We think she was going to knot it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. Oh, has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it.
There's a cat?
Well, no, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
Well, no sign of anyone having come in from the outside. That means their own road. I want to take another look upstairs. Now, whoever done it would have to know just the way.
She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in this pretty box.
When I was a girl, my kitten, there was a boy took a hatchet, and right before my eyes and before I could get there, if they had to held me back, I would have hurt him.
I wonder how it would seem to never have any children around. No, Sprite would like this bird. A thing that sang. She used to sing.
You killed that too. We don't know who killed that bird.
I know, John, right.
It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him.
We don't know who killed him. We don't know.
If there had been years and years of nothing, then a bird to sing to you, it would be awful still. After the bird was still.
I know what stillness is. When we homesteaded in Dakota, and my first baby died, and him already 2 years old, and me with no other than.
How soon do you suppose they'll be through looking for evidence?
I know what stillness is. But the law has got to punish crime, Mrs. Hale.
I wish you'd seen Minnie Foster. She wore a white dress with blue ribbons in her hair, stood up in the choir and sang. I should have come to see her. That was a crime. That was a crime. Who's going to punish that?
You mustn't take on.
I might have known she needed help. I know how things can be for women. It's queer, I tell you, Mrs. Peters. We live close together, and we live far apart, but we all go through the same things. It's just different kind of the same thing. If I was you, I wouldn't tell her fruit was gone. Tell her no. Tell her it's all right. This and prove it to her. She may never know whether it broke or not.
My. It's a good thing the men couldn't hear us. Wouldn't they just laugh? Carrying on over something like a dead canary. As if that could possibly have anything to do with... Oh, wouldn't they just laugh?
Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't.
No, Peters, it's all perfectly clear, except for a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. Boy, there was something to show, something to make a story about. Some way of connecting up with this strange way of doing it. looks like hail's got the team around. It's getting cold out there. You know, I think I'm gonna stay here. I'd like to take a look around again on my own. I'm not satisfied that we can't do better. You can send Frank around with the team for me later, can't you?
You want to see what Mrs. Peters wants to take in?
Oh. Well, they're not very dangerous things the ladies have picked out. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, the sheriff's wife is married to the law. Did you ever think of it that way, Mrs. Peters?
Not just that way.
Married to the law. Now, come on here for a moment. Want to take a look at the windows?
Oh, windows. Well, Henry, at least we found out she wasn't going to, quilt it. She was going to, what was it you ladies called it?